Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 451 for the 25th of Shevat in a regular year. And today we are going to be continuing chapter 27, and the topic of today's podcast is delayed gratification. So of course, I cannot talk about this topic without mentioning the very famous marshmallow experiment, which maybe some of you have heard. There were many renditions of this experiment, often trying to check into and research different aspects of delayed gratification. The original study, for those of you that are not familiar, was done in 1970 at Stanford University, where the basic idea of the study and the basic premise is, and the way that it worked, is that you would have these little kids and you would put them in a room, and each kid individually, and you would present to them different treats, and the treats varied. It could be a marshmallow, sometimes it was a pretzel, sometimes it would be a cookie or whatever. And the basic idea, and again, there were a few different variations of this even back in the day, back then, that the experimenter would say to the child, okay, here's what we're going to do. You're going to sit here for 15 minutes and we're going to put these treats in front of you. And if you are able to wait a full 15 minutes while we go away and out of this room, you will be able to eat not only this treat, but you'll be able to get 2 treats. And if you want, your choice, you can just forego that second treat and you can eat the first treat. So they did all kinds of different things, like what would cause the hindrance of delayed gratification, what would cause more increased likelihood of delayed gratification. What if we had the treat in front of the child? What if we took the treat away from the child and just told them about the treat? All kinds of different things. Subsequent studies in later years wanted to take this experiment a little bit further and see if there was some sort of correlation between the ability for a child to exhibit delayed gratification and future success in life, like as higher SAT scores or future job success, or all kinds of different things. And indeed, they did find that there was a correlation between children who were able to exhibit delayed gratification and future success in life or higher SAT score. But then upon further review in later studies, this causal relationship or correlation came under review, and people saw that it wasn't so simple. And in fact, there might have been a lot of it's a little bit more complex. Like basically they found that when they controlled for socioeconomic background and initial intelligence levels, then this correlation went away. So basically what this is basically saying is that do kids who have delayed gratification, is it because of this trait of delayed gratification that this is what makes them successful in life? Or is it that children that come from a more privileged home where their parents are more successful and they've inherited higher intelligence, maybe they are just better able at displaying delayed gratification? But either way, it doesn't really change the phenomenon that there is something positive, obviously, about delayed gratification, whether it's a cause or effect kind of thing, and that there is something to this trait of having delayed gratification that really does help a person achieve success in life. I mean, if you really think about it, it's kind of common sense, right? Even in terms of that really small experiment, logically speaking, if your goal is to get as many treats as possible as a child, then the common sense logical thing to do is wait the 15 minutes, get the 2 treats rather than eat that 1 treat right away, right? So anyways, so let's get into the Tanya, where that is exactly the topic of today. And obviously, in the Tanya, we're getting into it in a more spiritual way. So it's more about, it's less about what our own personal gain is. Do we get how many treats can we get and that kind of thing? But it's more about the virtue of delayed gratification in its own right, and how this is something that really should be strived for in its own right. So, and the reason why this is coming up now is because if you recall what we've been discussing so far in the Tanya lately is in this chapter is just the whole idea of inhibiting our negative and inappropriate thoughts. So the focus has been really more on things that are outright inappropriate, things that we really, really should not indulge in, and really learning how to repress these thoughts and repress these actions and really come to a sense of self-control within ourselves. But the topic today is really taking it a step further than that, where it's saying that what the Alter Rebbe is expecting of us and what is expected of a Beinoni, which is this person that we're all trying to be, is not only to be able to control yourself to such an extent that you don't do things that are outright wrong or inappropriate, but even those things that are okay, that are permissible, that are fine, or that are more neutral, we should still have a sense of self-control in those areas of life. So whether it's about eating, whether it's about speaking, really every aspect of our life, we want to be living in a more, nowadays the term mindfulness is very popular. So it's we basically want to be living a mindful life. We want to be living with a sense of consciousness where we're not just acting out on our impulses and behaving in just very impulsive ways, but we want to at all times, ideally, come to a state where every action that we do is coming from a place of more it has a more methodical nature to it. There's a little bit more mindfulness involved in it. And as we'll see, the more we practice doing this, practice of delayed gratification, the easier it will become. So while the struggle will never totally dissipate, because as we've already explained, we are not tzaddikim, and for the vast majority of us, we'll never become tzaddikim. Nevertheless, even on the level of a regular human and a Beinoni, who's an ideal version of a regular human, through this practice of delayed gratification, we can slowly begin to actually transform ourselves from the inside as well. And we'll see how the Alter Rebbe explains this. So let's get into the text. So the Alter Rebbe says, he says, and not only, but even the things that are permissible, totally permissible, every time that a person sacrifices their impulses, even for a small moment, and he has the intention of subduing the sitra achra, the other side that is found in this left ventricle of the heart that we talked about, and again, go back to previous episodes to learn more about what that means. But basically, when we sacrifice these impulses, that we have. So for example, what's an example that the Alter Rebbe gives? That a person wants to eat, and they delay their meal for 1 or 2 hours, and instead they involve themselves in Torah study during that time. So as it says in the Gemara, that the 4th hour is the time of eating for every man, and the 6th hour is the time of eating for a Talmid Chacham. So the Gemara, and this is from Shabbos, Masechet Shabbos, page 10a, if anybody's interested. So the Gemara basically is teaching us the virtue of delayed gratification when it comes to eating, that there's something virtuous about delaying your meal for a couple of hours. And so these Talmidei Chachamim would starve themselves for 2 hours for this intention. And this was the case even though after eating, they would still learn all day long. So it's not like, they didn't have time to learn. Their whole day was about learning, but yet they still, just for the sake of the delayed gratification, they would delay their meal for 2 hours. And this is the same thing if a person stops their mouth from talking about things that a person really likes. So things having to do with worldly matters, or even thoughts that are just kind of mundane kind of thought. So even this slight subjugation of this type of thing which is it's just a slight subjugation that happens here. A person holds themselves back from indulging in kind of useless things. This causes this ascension of the glory of God to ascend on high, as we discussed about previously. So what the Alter Rebbe basically is teaching us here is that there's something very virtuous and powerful about delayed gratification for its own sake. So where we've learned previously in this chapter that there's definitely something virtuous, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it, into repressing negative thoughts and to repressing things that are outright counterproductive or destructive. But here, the Alter Rebbe is taking it a step further, that even thoughts that are permissible and even actions that are permissible and speech that's permissible, there's something virtuous about just learning how to delay your gratification and develop a sense of self-control in all of these matters. So this might sound very like intense, like kind of like very controlling, like you want to be this really controlling kind of person. But I don't think that that's how we should think about it. I think it's like more, again, to kind of use a more popular term nowadays, is to live with a sense, with a kind of mindfulness, to make sure that every one of your actions at all time, to the best of your ability, is done in a mindful way, so that you're not just living in this like very reactive kind of way, but you are living in a more proactive kind of way. If you want to think about it that way, that every single action and speech and thought that you have is very intentional, and it's coming from a place that's of intentionality within you. Then the Alter Rebbe goes on here and he says that from this holiness, so which holiness? This is the holiness that got elevated when we subdued our Yetzer Hara. So we said the glory of God and his holiness rose up. So from this holiness that rose up is drawn down a supernal holiness to man below to help him out in his service of God. And then the Alter Rebbe here cites the Gemara in Masechet Yoma, page 39a, where it says that if a person sanctifies themselves a little bit below, then they are sanctified. Then God sanctifies them greatly above. And so, meaning to say that, like, we just do a little bit, we do our part, and then God will respond and he will sanctify us much more above. And this is aside from the fact that Alter Rebbe continues on, that you are actually fulfilling a positive commandment when you sanctify yourself. So in the Torah, in Vayikra, chapter 20, verse 7, there is a phrase, which there's a part of a verse where it says, V'tkadashtem, that you should be holy. So there is a positive commandment in its own right, regardless of the consequences of it, that we are supposed to be holy. But then there's like this added nice benefit that not only should we just be holy because God tells us to be holy and sanctify ourselves, which, as we've learned, means to kind of develop this level of like self-restraint and self-control, but it actually creates an effect on high. And then this effect on high comes back to us. It like boomerangs back to us, and it helps us out in our service. So when we sanctify ourselves with what is permissible for us. So the Alter Rebbe here defines what that means. So what does it mean that you sanctify yourself and make yourself holy? This means that even though you are not actually holy and you're not actually separate from the Sitra Achra, because this Sitra Achra, these negative impulses are actually still very, very strong as they were at birth in your left ventricle of your heart. So if you go back earlier on in the Tanya, we talked about this, how we all have within our left ventricle of the heart this like heated animal soul that resides there, that is kind of strays us and leads us towards destructive, negative kind of things. So the Alter Rebbe is saying we did not eradicate that. That's still within us. However, nevertheless, we are still supposed to act as if we're holy, as if we don't have this thing. And so we have conquered our impulse, and we sanctify ourselves in this way. So the impulse is there, the negative impulses are still there, but we're acting, this is the faking it part, we are acting as if it's not there. We are pushing it aside. And so thus we become sanctified. So, and what does this mean by the fact that thus we become sanctified? Is that then if we do this, if we act in this way, if we act in this holy, sanctified kind of way, in the end, we actually will become holy and sanctified and truly separated from the Sitra Achra through this, that God sanctifies us greatly from above and help us out to push aside from our heart little by little. So that is the end of this section, the end of this chapter. So just kind of to sum it up and bring it back to what we were talking about before is, so basically what the Alter Rebbe is teaching us here is that he's being very real. He's saying to us, I know that you guys all have negative impulses. That's not your fault. This is something we're all born with. We're all born in such a manner that we have an animal soul inside of us, and it leads us in all kinds of different directions, usually not in the most positive ways. And that's okay. That's how God made us. Nevertheless, what our job is to do is to sanctify ourselves. And what does that mean, to sanctify ourselves? It means that we need to tell that animal who's boss. We need to take control of our impulses, take control of our bodies, and say, yes, I know you're there. I know you're screaming loudly from within, and you want to do all these things, and you want me to act on all these impulses. I'm not going to let you. I'm going to push you down, and I'm going to take control. And when we do that, when we act as if we are holy, even if we're not actually on the inside, then God responds in kind, and God helps us out. And God says, you know what, I see this effort that you're doing, and it actually, and it's a real thing. It's like this real effect that our actions, this little bit that we do, there's a mirror effect above, that this causes this subdual of the negative forces above. And this causes this like overflowing, empowering force of holiness from above, from on high, to come down into us and help us out. And little by little, we actually will start to see real changes on the inside, from the inside. So if you go back to, what I talked about previously, I know I often talk about my yoga practice and my contortion practice and those kind of things, and how it can be very frustrating sometimes because you don't really see progress always. And there may be months and months and months where you don't really see a lot of progress. You don't really get that next pose. And a couple of episodes ago, we talked about how the effort is really the point, and that you kind of just are supposed to be in that effort, whether we're talking about yoga, lahavdil, or whether we're talking about serving God. God wants us to fight. God wants us to just continuously be in the struggle, and that is our actual purpose. Nevertheless, the Alter Rebbe here is giving us a little bit of a redeeming factor. He's saying, your efforts are not really in vain. If you do this enough, God will respond in kind. So same way, just like, again, lahavdil, in my yoga practice, it may be day after day after day after day of effort and no return and no improvement really for months and months and months. And it's very frustrating. But little by little, you do see improvements. And little by little, you do get that next pose. So too here, the Alter Rebbe is saying that this does happen. We work and we work and we work, and we try to better ourselves, and we try to work on ourselves, and we push aside our negative impulses, and eventually, not through our own efforts alone, but we kind of are gifted this like present from our on high due to the small effort that we made. So I hope that was somewhat enlightening, and that is the end of this chapter. And tomorrow we're going to move on to chapter 28. I will speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.